Today's tears, a cleansing for tomorrow. Young ones, listen. Remember who we are. Remember where we are. Do not take the word of America. Listen to them as in caution. Live among them as in surrounded. Live not as they live. Live to appreciate. Seconds ago in eternity, ancient ones decided, way before wounded spirits, dreams shattering under aggression. Earth is mother, we are children. The protection is our innocence. Seconds ago it was decided, we are the middle of forever. Look for your medicine. There is a white world gone mad, thinking protection is in force. Greed, the machine, preys on them, but they will not admit it or do anything about it. They have no medicine, with backs turned on children and elders. They do not even care for air or water or land or life. Too confused to care is no way to live. Young ones, listen. Remember who you are. Remember where you are. Remember why you are. Trying to forget. The hardest part of trying to forget is the remembering forgetting brings back. I thought you were like the things that have happened, things and thoughts I'd put away. But you are you, more than can just be put away. How frivolous of me to assume I could regard you as a thing or a thought. Trying to forget only makes me remember emotions we share in our spirit hearts. The delights and the anger so vital, our wildness making us quick to burn bridges behind us and ahead of us, changing compromise to submit, looking for happiness, finding regret. Sometimes you appear, it's in a song, a phrase, sometimes it's a laugh, sometimes it's a vision of you near to me, or a remembrance of a touch, a kiss, or some silly thought we shared. Times are I wonder what went wrong. Maybe our impatience stopped us from taking the time to learn what we thought we already knew. Trying to forget only makes me remember you. When you left, I knew you had to go. Water came into my eyes, I cried, then I laughed, because sometimes I just don't know. I wanted you to stay, but you weren't really here anyway. Or if you were, it was for just a while. I've run it through my mind and rerun it through my heart. I loved you more than I could say or show. Like I say, I loved you more, but that's something only I could know. Water came into my eyes, I cried, then I laughed. What's the difference anyway? Laughing and crying, the tears taste just the same. I held you, but I didn't hold you. And in the end, I guess, I only kept myself. Her beauty is like a dancer in the night, carrying rhythms others can only imagine. Everyone wanted her, yet no one kept her beyond a fleeting moment when all seemed right. She left on her own, driven away by what they had to keep to themselves. He was one of those thinking to claim what others took long ago. They could never share the secrets, for their secrets are shame's mistakes kept quietly, making noise only when crashing down upon them like invisible walls, not able to stand on their own when they sold beauty for things their hearts never understood. Pretending what others could not see was connected to reality. They made it easy to believe, but almost impossible to live. Together they traded depth for surfaces, trading until they traded it all away for misunderstandings. Her beauty is like a dancer in the night, carrying rhythms others can only imagine. Everyone wanted her, yet no one kept her beyond a fleeting moment when all seemed right. I went so willingly, thinking about knowing the beauty of your face. Your smile, your charm, dazzled these sometime broken eyes. Your spoken thoughts of love and laughter placed the chains around me so tightly I didn't know at first. I went so willingly, thinking about knowing the beauty of your face. Things went wrong, they often do. You grew to need me less. I went into needing you more. One day seeing we were both in a pretty prison, all I could do was escape. I went so willingly, thinking about knowing the beauty of your face. Like a butterfly with a fading heart, she needed someone to care for her. When she couldn't find it, she ran back to the mistakes. Anger and uncomfortably comfortable emotion greedily spread over those who love her, safer than taking a chance. What we try to hide, we never can, beyond placing it in ourselves. Wounds voluntarily inflicted, creating our own betrayal. Worrying about being used as we use up our time, scaring away the balance. Mental M16s mowing down the enemy. Insecurity turning trust into targets in a battle we don't understand, with industrial greed the victor. Like a butterfly with a fading heart, she needed someone to care for her. All that was
Welcome, Aquaba. Happy Sunday. We hope that you are well today and that you're reaching your highest level of mental, physical, and spiritual strength. And if you are not, that you are rapidly approaching. And we are so thankful that you have decided to join us this Sunday for this week's episode of Our Ancestors' Voices. And our topic this week is Cuba and Assata are not terrorists. Cuba and Assata Shakur are not terrorists. The imperialist system led by the United Snakes of America is on this constant campaign to label Cuba as a terrorist country, socialist Cuba, and to label our sister African liberation freedom fighter Assata Shakur as a terrorist, who is, if you don't know, Assata Shakur has lived in Cuba under political asylum since 1984. And this program today is just simply to make the statement that Assata Shakur and the socialist government of Cuba calling the U.S. calling them terrorists is like a fox calling the sheep terrorists. That's just obviously doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Dr. Martin Luther King told us the U.S. is the #1 purveyor of violence on the face of the earth. The U.S. can call nobody a terrorist. The U.S. is the chief terrorist in the history of human civilization. So we're going to talk about that today. We're glad you joined us for that. And we are in honor and thanks to the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere for their hosting us for 531 years. And we stand with them in their struggle to gain their land back. And we, of course, honor our African ancestors, who is the reason that we continue to struggle for our Shimaranga and our freedom as human beings. And so we just go to our quick introduction to let you know who we are. And we are, of course, this program is Our Ancestors' Voices. It's a program sponsored each Sunday, same time, same place, same platforms by the All African People's Revolutionary Party, the AAPRP. And the AAPRP is a revolutionary, independent, mass Pan-African political party based in Africa. And our objective is Pan-Africanism, which we define correctly as one unified socialist Africa. And that work is taking place as we speak on the ground on the African continent. And that's work to achieve Pan-Africanism, which is outlined in Kwame Nkrumah's Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare. And we stop for a second and ask you to please keep in mind our comrades on the ground, all throughout the African continent, but right now, particularly in Guinea-Bissau, the forces of neocolonialism and capitalism are waging a war against the forces that are trying to liberate our people, and the PAIGC is forefront in that process. So we want to give a heartfelt love to our comrades on the ground, APRP, PAIGC, and Guinea-Bissau, and we are standing ready to do whatever we can to support the safety and security of our people. And our Ancestors' Voices is hosted each week by APRP organizers, myself, Ajamu, and my biological and ideological daughter, Shakura Umi. And so without any further delay, to get us started, I will turn it over to Shakura.
Greetings. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. Greetings, everyone. We hope you are well. So definitely want to acknowledge how important our comrade has been in helping us to get to where we are. I also think it's important to acknowledge some of the mistruths that exist around Cuba. And so hopefully we can address some of those today and encourage you to do your own research, right? Because we say each week that you shouldn't just take our word for it. If we ask you to join an organization that's working for justice, that's because we're hoping that you're going to actually do the research to figure out which organizations you closely align with and find a way to connect with them, right? We can't expect you to just listen to us because we want you to think for yourselves. We don't want you to just listen to from one person to the next and have other people making decisions for you. That's precisely the problem currently. And so that's what we're trying to work on addressing. And one way to do that is for information correctly, may I add, and credibly, may I add, to be offered to you so that you can have a conjunction of this correct and truthful information compared to the mislies and the truths, the mistruths and lies that are already being fed to you. And then it's up to you to kind of do some more research beyond that to figure out what road you really want to follow and take. Like I said, we don't want to simply replace the imperialists and the master and start telling you what to do because that's already the problem. We're already trained on how to think about everything. That's why media is specifically formatted in a way where our ideas, our values, our beliefs, our morals can be influenced. And then from there, it's just a question of us thinking that we're making a decision when in actuality, capitalism and imperialism have already done a really good job of convincing us and persuading us that this was the way to go. And you can always think about the example we give you all, where even if you have never had, a hamburger or you've never eaten beef, we all still remember the jingle, especially if we're old enough to remember, of 2 all-beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions on a sesame seed bun. I don't even remember the last time I went to McDonald's, and I certainly don't eat beef or hamburgers, but that's precisely how immaculate, immaculate, I'm going to use that word. That's precisely how immaculate capitalism and imperialism are in terms of framing information and then finding a way to consistently and consecutively give it to you to where it's in your repertoire. And like I said, even if you don't consume the product that's being promoted and advertised, you're still going to ascertain what the message is that they want you to have. So we hope that we can give you some of that as well and hopefully start to process a little bit differently how you should be thinking about Cuba a little bit differently, because we hope to have a consistent and consecutive message that we're trying to give you. But the thing about messages that are consistent and consecutive is you can't just receive it today and then just let it solter. You have to continue to share what you've learned today. Hopefully, you've invited other people to join. But in addition to that, maybe you're having conversations tomorrow, Tuesday, Wednesday, where you're saying, I listened to this seminar over the weekend and this is what they had to say. And I was actually really impacted by blah, 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 or X, Y, and Z. And then it goes from there and it continues. One of the best things that we can do to help commemorate, but also acknowledge our comrades like Assata and other comrades who were faced with similar struggles is by promoting the truth around their names, promoting the truth around their legacy, and dismantling the lies that capitalism and imperialism have worked overtime to craft and disseminate. So our objective is to change that, and we can think more about how since 1959, the revolution of Cuba has done that very same thing of continuously showing us that their socialist development is precisely based and rooted, if you will, in improving the lives of the 12 million people, while also trying to make sure that they're not just thinking about their own people on their own land. People in Cuba are actively working to make the world, not just Cuba, the world a better place. And I think that is so important. When I teach my students, I do talk about Cuba because usually I'm teaching a public health class and I'm trying to give some examples as to how we need to start to not be afraid of the word socialism, and we need to start to dissect it a little bit more, because in my opinion, you can't achieve healthy outcomes in a capitalist society. I mean, that's just based on evidence. So I give examples of socialist countries that are prioritizing people's health. And of course, Cuba comes up. A lot of my students are ignorant and they have no idea what even is to be known about Cuba. And so this is an opportunity for them to grow. But I bring this example up to say this: we are taught as individuals in this society to focus simply on our own needs. We are taught that. That's another example of propaganda. So, when you think about it, you're not just thinking about how if the location you lived in was hit by a tornado, or if the location you lived in 7,000 houses lost their electricity, you're not necessarily thinking, okay, I need to check on all 7,000 of those houses. Your only concern is that you don't have electricity. Or if the tornado hit your house along with 5 others, you're not going to necessarily worry about the other 5 houses. Your main concern is dealing with your house, because our society has raised us and taught us to be individualistic, to put our own needs first, to be selfish, to only think about ourselves. And when other people try to display humanity or try to display collectivism, our first thought is to laugh at them. Our first thought is to mimic them. Our first thought is to shun or shame them, because we don't understand why they are, quote unquote, worrying about other people when they need to be worrying about themselves, right? And at the end of the day, capitalism thrives off of that. It's almost as if you are giving capitalism, which is maybe an electrical machine, and you're giving it power every time you put your needs first. Every time you practice dehumanization, you're giving it more power. You're giving it more authority. You're giving it more of a reason to be consistent. You're giving it more of a reason to exist. And so we think more about what that looks like. And so I highlight Cuba because Cuba has never put their own needs first. They have never, ever, ever done that. Every single health accomplishment that they have made has always been to benefit everyone on this gosh darn planet. And you cannot tell me that that is not a noble thing to do. You cannot tell me. If you did tell me that, you would be ignorant as all get out. Because what you're telling me is, if Cuba has found a solution to eradicate syphilis transmission or HIV transmission, if you think that Cuba is stupid because they're trying to share that same method and formula so that other people don't have to transmit HIV and syphilis when they are possibly laboring children, what you're telling me is that you're okay with the fact that HIV and syphilis are still grand, large problems worldwide, except for Cuba. And you'd have to be out of your mind to say that. Because the thing about syphilis and HIV is it is not selective on who it impacts. It just starts impacting people. And the more people who have children and don't know are literally passing that on to their children and offspring. And I don't know enough evidence to see if it can pass from the child to other people. But I would imagine if not treated, then yes, it's still going to be there. And it's probably going to develop other health problems along the way. So the reason that we highlight Cuba is because they didn't just find a way to eradicate transmission in their 12 million people. They've been desperately trying to pass that to the rest of us, because they understand that HIV is still a problem worldwide. They understand that syphilis is still a problem worldwide. They understand that people are dying every day from these two things. We understand that there are some people who live with HIV. We understand that there are some people who live with syphilis, but that doesn't mean that they want to live with it and not have a better quality of life outcome. And if you're telling me that you found a way to eradicate the transmission of it, literally wiping out a threat of a disease, all of us should be completely on board with whatever you have to say. I don't care if you study public health or if you study criminology. You should be on board with that because HIV will still endanger you whether you study criminology or public health. Syphilis will still endanger you whether you study criminology or public health. And so I prioritize Cuba in that, and this is why I bring them up with my students, because my students are extremely individualistic. It's not their fault. That's the system we live in. I have to check myself because sometimes I can display individualistic behaviors. And I try to remind the students, especially in public health, you're not going into it just to think about yourselves. So when I'm talking to my students and they say things like, well, I want to go into public health because I really want to make a difference so that my family doesn't have to be susceptible to HIV or to hepatitis B or to chronic fatigue syndrome or whatever the disease is that they're interested in studying, cancer or whatever it is. I always say, that's good, and sometimes they'll say, or the people who look like me, indigenous people or Asian people, I don't want them to suffer, meaning everybody else can suffer, but not them. And so I always tell my students, so hepatitis C may impact Asian descent people more likely than other people. That's probably true. I don't know the data, but probably. But I always tell them, but look at Cuba. Cuba doesn't just focus on keeping all the secrets to their master chamber of eradicating of viruses to themselves. They share it with the world. And during the pandemic, they shared the antiviral treatment with every single person that was willing to accept them. They would have shared it with the United States, but the US is too busy and too egotistical with that dumbass blockade where they don't even want to admit the fact that they needed help. And we could have had antiviral treatment much sooner than Pfizer was able to release their first pilot vaccine. So these are the things that we have to think about because I try to remind my students, you're not helping us by continually thinking individualistically. That's not helping us. You should not just be focused on addressing the needs of your family members and their health, or the fact that you want to address the people that look like you and their health. We have to understand that a lot of these viruses, specifically the ones that are airborne, are not going to care whether they affect Asian people, whether they affect African people, whether they affect any of us. Cuba understands that, which is why they're trying to share their resources so that less people can be sick. And this, my friends, is why it's the best example of public health, because the thing about public health is if there is one virus, if there is one illness, if there is anything that exists that can be a danger to the rest of us, then that virus can impact all of us. And it doesn't matter about our race, it doesn't matter about our class, it doesn't matter about our gender. Whereas Cuba understands that. So they are actively working to do what? To eradicate all threats that could affect a person's health. I mean, you've got to be out of your mind to not be excited about that kind of research, to potentially think of a world where people wouldn't have to worry about dying before they need to because they can labor a child or because they can develop cancer and then never have the cancer come back. That is absolutely amazing. And like I said, the world we live in where we're trained, if you do come across the cure for something, it should be your number one objective to profit off of it and to select who you give it to. Thank God Cuba has never had that mindset. Thank God they have never been in a position where they wanted to keep things from other people. Thankfully, they have not wanted, they've only wanted to help. And more than that, they've wanted to, again, neutralize the threat. They didn't want COVID to be an issue for anyone. So they shared the antiviral treatments with every single country that they could. They sent doctors all over the world to administer it correctly. They sent backups to make sure that they have plenty of options for people, maybe that needed another option if they were scared of needles or whatever the case may be. And so, like, these are the things, you all, that we have to think about, because the bottom line is the research that Cuba is doing, it is going to impact you. So you need to not be ignorant to just how amazing they are in terms of everything they have done and all the things that they're doing, especially when it comes to their revolution of 1959. We have to be very clear in understanding that they have been down for you and they have been down for Africans. So whether you identify as African or not, you are directly benefiting from the research and the work they have done. Now, you can't be ignorant. You need to do your own research on what that exactly looks like, but you have directly benefited it from some way, shape, or form, because the proof is in the pudding. People who go to Cuba to obtain their medical degrees, they don't just stay in Cuba, they go back to their respective countries. So you may have very well have had a provider at some point that was educated under Cuba medical law. You may have very much have had that. Maybe you knew about it, maybe you didn't. And so that's the point I'm making to you is we all benefit from their humanistic principles. That's what I'm saying. We all benefit from the fact that they want everyone to be healthy. We all benefit from the fact that they don't want to make money off of you. We benefit off of the fact that they want you to come and receive your medical service, and then they don't want to see you anymore. I mean, that's such an absurd concept for us to even think about. Because here in the US, the objective is to manage your sickness, not to address it and to cure it, to manage it so that you can just put a band-aid on it and continue to pay for your medications because then the pharmacy company can keep making money off of you. Whereas in Cuba, they don't want to see you after they've serviced you. They want your health to be top par and subpar so that you don't need to come back. I mean, how miraculous is that? How miraculous is that? And we benefit from that. And so we need to understand just how important that is because that is ultimately going to affect a lot of the decisions we make. Next slide, please. We can also think about how, because Cuba wanted very much so, they strongly supported, endorsed, and they were very much open and welcoming to our comrade Assata to come in. And so they made sure that they wanted to give her political asylum. And this took place in 1984 because there were so many influences from other presidential cabinets, specifically Obama, for example, but even others that worked really hard since the early 1980s to taint Assata's name, to give out lies, to make sure that the legacy she had created was not one based on truth, but actually one based on mistruth. They also wanted to make sure that she was considered to be, criminalized in terms of every aspect of it. And we want to remind you all, in this system, there's not much that you can trust. There's not much that you can trust when you watch CNN. There's not much that you can trust when you watch Fox. There's not much that you can trust when you watch PBS. All of these systems, whether they're nonprofit or not, are in some or direct way related to capitalism, which means people do not matter. That's basically what capitalism means in 10 seconds or less. People don't matter, money does. So if you're receiving information from a system or an organization that could be influenced by a certain amount of money, and depending on how high that money is, that value of money, then the information could be changed in terms of how you're receiving it, then that source is not trustworthy for you because they could very well say one thing on Tuesday, and if somebody comes up with a large enough check, then they're able to say something very different on Wednesday. Meanwhile, you're looking at the information you got Tuesday, and now you're reviewing Wednesday, and you're saying something is not adding up. That's because people are inconsistent, and they're so driven by money and greed, they don't know how to be authentic or humane anymore. So we have to understand that when Assata received political asylum in 1984, this was against the direct order of several presidents, including Obama, because they were all trying to betray her. They were all trying to taint her legacy. They were all trying to make her out to be the villainous criminal, right? Because that's the objective is when we have people who are pushing against the system, they are ultimately considered to be criminals. They're thugs, they're villains, all these things. When in actuality, it's really quite backwards that we're celebrating the actual thugs, right? So I went to Kit Carson Middle School, right? So we're celebrating people who raped and killed indigenous people by naming schools after them where our children are being educated. What sense does that make? I just need somebody to tell me. What sense does that make? Okay. So we're celebrating the actual villains and criminals, right? Marion Sims had a statue built in New York, and he raped unconsentedly, by the way, and violated and did unethical research on African women for 4 years in the state of Alabama under obstetrics gynecology, but a statue was made for him, right? So we have all these different ways that we celebrate actual villains, actual criminals. We celebrate them, but the people who are resisting the system, the people who are trying to put an end to the unethical research, the people who are trying to put an end to the violent nature of killing indigenous people, the people who are fighting back because they do not want the outcomes to be the same for the next generation of people, Assata Shakur, Huey P. Newton, Robert Williams. These are the people, Eldridge Cleaver, these are the people that Cuba understands have needed to receive their support, because these folks had some very serious issues with the system where they didn't want to accept it anymore. So they fought back, and because of that, they were deemed as a threat. And because of that, they needed to go. They needed to be eradicated, and they needed to be killed. And so, Cuba has demonstrated their alliance and their work with Africa through working with these different people or supporting them in some way, shape, or form, because they understand that though the legacy, the resistance that these people have done, it has not been in vain. It has only been to make the conditions better, not just for Africans. Because just like Africans who are conscious, we understand that we need to change the conditions for the whole world. And Cuba also understands that, as I just tried to point out in the previous slide. So we have these different understandings where it's not just enough where we need to change the conditions for African people. Assata Shakur, Eldridge Cleaver, Huey P. Newton, Robert Williams, all of these people wanted to change the realities for Africans, but they also understood that it was still an injustice for other people. And as our comrade King pointed out, an injustice everywhere, anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So we can't just address our problems. We can't just address colonialism on the continent. We need to eradicate it everywhere. Because if we leave even a trace of colonialism in Palestine, if we leave even a trace of colonialism in Ireland, if we leave even a trace of colonialism in any part of Asia, guess what? The colonizers are going to mobily move, and they're going to try to recolonize some of these areas that were previously colonized, or they may try to take over and recolonize it again. But if you just take away colonization altogether, then it's a little bit harder for people to regain that traction and that momentum. And so, as I said before, and I'll say again, there's a continued solidarity between Cuba and our African warriors who have been fighting since the beginning of time to change these conditions, because they understand, and Cuba understands, that together we have the power to change the conditions for the world. This is why resisting is so important. This is why joining an organization is so important. Every single person I listed was in an organization that was working for justice. If they had not been in one, we probably would not have seen as much of a momentous impact of their work, because the organization influenced their ideology. The organization helped them understand that capitalism was not to be trusted. The organization helped them understand that imperialism was not to be trusted. Excuse me. And so we're thankful for these folks, and we're thankful for the work that they have done, but we need to continue it, which is why we need to join organizations that are working for justice too. We can't just sit on a seminar and say, yeah, that's really cool what Assata is doing, and I'm so glad she has political asylum even to this day. Assata says on her website that she wants you to join an organization because she sees the empowerment of it. She sees the importance of it, and she's not a hypocrite. She's clearly in organizations all her life, and she's still in some today. And so this is how we can best support our people who have done everything they could do for us at that moment in their lives. And now they're passing the baton to us, you all. And I'll say this before I close. It's really imperative that you make this one of your goals for the next year. If you are not already in an organization that is working for justice, we strongly recommend you get in one today. If not today, next week. All you have to do is research it, check out, go to the next meeting. Maybe that's not the organization for you. Maybe you go to another one after that. Maybe you start your own. But we are still facing the same problems that we were facing when Donald Trump was in office, and now we're facing them with Joe Biden. You just heard about the college that was shot down just last week. So gun violence has not been changed since Biden got in office. Maternal mortality rates are still an issue for African femme people, even though Kamala Harris said that this was something she was going to fix in her platform. Like, these are still problems, you all. They're going to continue to be problems because people don't matter in capitalism. Money does. So if we all can find organizations that are working for justice, then we can start to change that narrative where people actually do matter, because we're going to fight back, and we're going to help the people in power understand that their power is limited, because we're not taking no for an answer, and we are going to change the conditions. But it's going to take all of us, which means you need to be held responsible for that. And if you're just still not ready, if it's still too much of a commitment, then the least you can do is support Pan-Africanist organizations that are working for justice. Send money. Help us understand ways that we can raise money to buy books for our folks in Burkina Faso. Make sure that you support us when we start advertising for the African Liberation Day Fund. Make sure you support us when we start advertising for Pan African Women's Day. We're probably going to be collecting donations for our comrades in Guinea-Bissau pretty soon. Stay alert, stay vigilant to that. Do your research, increase your political education, but we need you. People are still dying. So it doesn't matter if it's a Republican or a Democrat. At this point, you should know that that doesn't matter. What matters is money. That's the only color that matters is green. And if you don't have enough green, then you're insignificant. And that has got to change. You wouldn't be on this seminar if you didn't agree with that. That has simply got to change because that means that poor people are always going to suffer. And that's not okay. Ashe.
Ashe, thank you, Shakura, very much. And without question, we agree that these are the things that we have to be focused on. And we want to, my screen is jumping up and down here. Sorry. Give me a second. Don't know what's happening. It's doing its own thing, but I think we can get it straightened out. So we just want to continue and talk about this question of Cuba being on the U.S. terrorist list and Assata Shakur being on the U.S. terror list. And we just want to talk about and break down how insane that is. And we're not, making any demands of the capitalist system. We want to organize and destroy the capitalist system. So what we're here to do is provide information. Like Shakur said, you get information. Hopefully the idea is that that'll encourage you to want more information, and that'll inspire you as you get more information to want to get involved to address the problem. That's what our objective is. We're not passing out any petitions to those people who are doing that. We applaud you. That's great work. That's just not the lane that we operate in. We are Pan-Africanist revolutionaries. So our responsibility is to raise consciousness and get people to commit, to do work, to build this worldwide revolutionary Pan-Africanist force so we can walk right over the chest of imperialism and capitalism, or capitalism and imperialism, whatever way you want to define those crooks and thugs. And we can take back our power and build one unified socialist Africa. That's our lane that we're in. So if you don't want to be in that lane, get in some lane. But that's what we're talking about. And on this question of Cuba is not terrorist, since the Cuban revolution was victorious on January 1, 1959, U.S. imperialism has never ceased to stop trying to sabotage Cuba. I mean, we really have to understand that statement. They've never ceased in wanting to sabotage Cuba. They've never left Cuba alone. From the 1961 Navy SEAL invasion at Playa del Guiron, or what these capitalists call the Bay of Pigs. They sent 1,500 of these terrorists into Cuba, and they thought that they had a network in Cuba that was going to rise up and overthrow the Cuban Revolution. And then that didn't happen. And then the following year, they told you, and what you learned in school is that Cuba had missiles pointed at the U.S., and Kennedy intimidated Cuba and the Soviet Union in removing those missiles. They called it the crisis in October, or missiles in October, or some nonsense that they called it. But they didn't tell you that the reason why the missiles were placed in Cuba pointing at the U.S. in the first place in October 1962 was because before that, the U.S. had missiles in Turkey pointing at the Soviet Union. So the fact that the missiles, all the missiles, the ones in Turkey and in Cuba, came down, that's another victory for the Cuban Revolution against U.S. imperialism. And then in 1980, the U.S., under that garbage president, Jimmy Carter, in his last year in office, they wanted to attempt to embarrass the Cuban Revolution. They wanted to attempt to portray the Cuban Revolution as a terrorist entity. So they went on the air talking about fueled by pressure they were getting from those reactionary roaches in Florida, the so-called exile Cuban community, nothing but roaches, filthy roaches and rats there in the Florida area, in the United States. They wanted to attempt to embarrass the Cuban Revolution by talking about how the Cuban Revolution was imprisoning people who were innocent. It was a dictatorship. It was an authoritarian regime that did not give people their human rights. And so the Cuban government, always smarter than any of these presidents they've had during the time of the Cuban Revolution, from Eisenhower all the way up to the one that's in there right now, the cracker that's in there right now, Biden. The Cuban Revolution has been smarter than all of them, including Obama. And so when this happened in 1980, they asked the Carter administration, so what prisons are you saying these people were in where we're violating their human rights? And the U.S. government gave them a list of prisons. And so Cuba proceeded to release 125,000 people incarcerated in those prisons, the people that the U.S. said were wrongly imprisoned. And they sent those people here to the U.S. They called it the Mario boat lift. And it was portrayed in the movie Scarface. That's what the whole movie Scarface with Al Pacino is about. You just watched it because it was a gangster movie, but the whole movie was about the Mario boat lift. That's what the character that's what Tony Montana, the character that Al Pacino played in Scarface, that's who he was one of the people in the Mario boat lift. Hardened criminals. That's what they were. And that's why Cuba did it, to demonstrate that. And again, a victory for the Cuban Revolution over U.S. imperialism. In 2000, the year 2000, you had the Elian Gonzalez situation. And that back and forth seesaw battle that was won by the Cuban Revolution. And today, Elian Gonzalez has grown up and is an active and vocal supporter of the Cuban Revolution, another victory for the Cuban Revolution. And in the 1990s, when Cuba went through the so-called special period with the fall of the Soviet Union, the U.S. was singing the Amazing Grace at the funeral of the Cuban Revolution, and the Cuban Revolution, relying on the vitality of the Cuban people who support their socialist revolution, began to develop ways of getting around the U.S. economic blockade that had been in force since 1962, strangling the Cuban economy. And the Cuban people developed a biomedical technological field that has influenced medicine in a way that no other country on earth has done since the early 90s, so that they have still the healthiest people in the world today, according to the imperialist World Health Organization. This is true. And they don't even have pharmaceuticals like you do here in the backward United States of America. Their medicines come from plants because they have not been permitted to have pharmaceuticals because of the U.S. blockade against them. So this is just some of the examples. We could go on all day. But since 1969, U.S. imperialism has sought to sabotage Cuba, and they've been ineffective at doing that. Cuba has beaten them on every turn. Fidel Castro had more intelligence in his pinky than Eisenhower, than Kennedy, Johnson, Carter, Nixon, Ford. I get them out of order. I get them. I get the crackers confused. Reagan, Bush, Clinton, Bush, Obama, Trump, Biden, all of those crackers. Fidel Castro had more intelligence in his pinky than all of those crackers and the one wannabe cracker combined. So now we look at, from that point of 1959 forward, the U.S. has also attempted to sabotage the Cuban Revolution by supporting terrorist activities designed to undermine Cuba's stability in Cuba. And examples of this are the Cuban American National Foundation. You should look them up. The Cuban American National Foundation. They are a lobbyist group, and they have existed for several decades. And on the surface, they lobby, and they, people like Gloria Estefan, another roach, and Andy Garcia, another roach. These types of people, they raise money for the Cuban American National Foundation. These roaches do that. And this organization serves to play a significant role in lobbying the U.S. government to support policy against the Cuban Revolution. But then on the underbelly, because these people are criminals and terrorists, the Cuban American National Foundation has played a role in providing support for some of these criminals, like the one you see on your screen there, Luis Posada Corrales. Thank God he's no longer alive. But when he was alive, he engaged in multiple terrorist activities against the socialist revolution in Cuba, with his staging area being Miami, Florida. In 1973, in 1977, rather, this criminal engineered with CIA training, with CIA equipment and logistical support, they shot down a Cuban airline over Cuban airspace, carrying the entire Cuban national football team. They killed 73 people. This is a terrorist act. And this man and the people who helped him and the CIA agents that trained them and guided them and supported them walked around in Florida, funded by your tax dollars or your parents' tax dollars, and nothing happened to them. And then you will sit around here today and listen to these crackers and wannabe crackers running this government tell you that, well, we are against terrorism 100%. Hamas is a terrorist organization. You are out of your goddamn mind. These people have been engaging and supporting, financing, and arming terrorist activities against socialist Cuba for 60 plus years on your dime. You're paying for it. And you will sit there and listen to them tell you who to terror. You're crazy as hell if you do that. Speaking of roaches, we should get a bucket full of roaches and you should stick your head in it, because that's the only purpose that you serve if you can't figure out a way to think on a higher level than that. The Cuban Socialist Revolution, you can't name one thing that they've done against any capitalist country, not just the United States of America. You can't name one thing. They haven't flown one plane to attack this country. They haven't sent one person to commit harm to a single person in this country. And I just gave you 8 or 9 examples of how this country has engaged in out-and-out terror against the Cuban people. And yet they want to tell you that Cuba should be on a terrorist list. You got to be out of your goddamn mind. And this fool here murdered dozens of innocent Cubans with U.S. taxpayer financing. And today, nothing has been done against that. And that's what we have a problem with. And we just have to, say that we know that their real agenda is that they want to punish Cuba because Cuba's socialist example has provided inspiration to people all over the planet Earth. Cuba's socialist example, like Shakur said, the fact that they've eliminated HIV transmissions with medicines made from plants, you all. They've eliminated cervical cancer. They've eliminated these things in their society. They've eliminated illiteracy. Everybody in Cuba can read and write. They have an education standard that even the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the United Nations, all of these imperialist-dominated organizations have had to acknowledge that Cuba's educational system is matched by no one else on the planet Earth, you all. And this is an understanding that their children learn about what's going on in school. Their socialist system ensures that African history, because Cuba, like every other country in the Western Hemisphere, was a slave state, so they study African history so they can teach their children that. Here in this backward-ass country, they're trying to deny that slavery ever existed. Or at least it wasn't really that bad. It was good for the slaves. That's what these idiots and these damn fools here are talking about. But their education about African history and the enslavement of Africans is a part of their regular curriculum in school. Women's history is a part of their regular curriculum in school. Understanding LGBTQ people is a part of their regular curriculum in school. And you sitting up here haven't read a single goddamn page out of one book about LGBTQ anything, and you want to sit here and expect that we want to listen to what your opinion. We don't give a damn what your opinions are. These folks are building a society that's based on an improved and increased level of consciousness. And they know that they will have funerals to eliminate all of the people who are still hanging on to these backward capitalist ideas. And in just a few short generations, they will have a revolutionary society of conscious people. Because today, 70% of the people in Cuba were born after the revolution. So they're gearing towards the future. And so we just want to say that there's no reason for them to be on any terrorist list. The only reason why they're on there is because they represent real inspiration for what the world should look like. And these crooks and criminals here don't want you to see that. And along with that, the question of Assata Shakur here in this picture in 2014, Raul Castro, who at that time was Secretary General of the Cuban Communist Party, and he had a meeting with Obama, and they made a big deal about Obama loosening the restrictions on access to Cuba, really just in terms of travel. He did nothing to address the question of the economic blockade against Cuba, which still exists. And the reason why I would argue that Obama even wanted to change the travel relationships to Cuba was because of this FBI ransom on the head of Assata Shakur. Because if Cuba's easier to get to now, and they're saying there's $2 million for anybody that can kidnap Assata and bring her back to the U.S., it makes sense to lessen travel restrictions. Because we know for a fact, it's documented, it's in the transcripts, that was what Obama brought up to Raul Castro in 2014, is the question of handing Assata Shakur over to the U.S. government in exchange for the U.S. government releasing some wrongly imprisoned people like the Cuban Five who broke no laws, but were simply reporting on terrorist activities from people in Miami against the socialist government of Cuba. So Obama took his ass down there and was saying, we'll let some of those people go if you give us Assata Shakur. And Raul Castro told him the question of Assata Shakur is not even on the table because we are principled revolutionaries and we are not going to give in to imperialism. So this is what happened. And this is why they're so mad at Assata, because she, like the Cuban Revolution, represents someone who was broken out of the Clinton Correctional Facility in New Jersey on November 2nd, 1979, and they want to do everything in their power to get her back in their custody. Because what happened with Assata being liberated by a multiracial group of revolutionaries calling themselves the May 19th Committee, people who were, many who were convicted, who were arrested and convicted of helping Assata Shakur escape. Dr. Mutulu Shakur, who we just recently lost respect on him. Our white comrade sister, my auntie Marilyn Buck, who we lost in 2010, respect on her. They were convicted and served 30 plus years each for helping Assata Shakur escape. And she got political asylum in Cuba since 1984. And Raul Castro told this wannabe cracker, Obama, that you are not, that we're not even talking about that with you all. You can, and Obama told him, well, we might be able to talk about the economic blockade if you talk about releasing Assata Shakur to us. And Raul Castro said it's a non-starter. We're not talking to you about that. This is a lesson that people can learn. These people could use more than anything on earth the lifting of this U.S. economic blockade against them. It would allow them to engage in trade with every country on earth, and it would alleviate the struggles that they have economically because of their limited ability due to the blockade to get medicines, to get spare parts, to be able to have parts to repair their refrigerators and their stoves and their washing machines and their dryers and their cars, etc., and so forth. They don't have that. They have to be creative to do that. Lifting the blockade would be very beneficial for the Cuban Revolution. But these people are not like most of you out here. They operate on principles. So they
are saying, and what they said to Obama 10 years ago, is we will continue to suffer before we sell our sister out. A lot of you would have sold, they went to you with a deal. You would have sold Assata out. She was hiding in your house. You would have sold, let me go get her right now and give her to you. You say, you gonna give me some money, right? Let me go get her and give it to you. A lot of you would have sold out all this stuff you be talking, yapping your mouth about every day. You would have sold, it took you less than 30 seconds to decide to sell out. But the Cuban Revolution, since its inception, has been based on principles of justice. And if you are a person who is striving to become a person of integrity, this is something you need to study. This whole question of Assata Shakur and how Cuba has handled this. And you have to do your study. You have to understand it, because the reactionaries will tell you that, well, you haven't heard from Assata because they have her under house arrest. That's a goddamn lie. Now, these people done opened up the travel to Cuba. People are able to go to Cuba. And even if they shut down some of the travel routes, people now know how to get to Cuba. And so they have $2 million they could collect if they could find Assata Shakur in Cuba. So the Cuban government is doing what they've always done. They are protecting African revolutionaries. They did it in the Congo in Southern Africa in the 1980s and 90s, sending 500,000 troops to beat back the white supremacists and apartheid seekers in Southern Africa. They did it when they embraced Robert Williams in 1962, when they embraced Huey P. Newton, the co-founder of the Black Panther Party, when they embraced Eldridge Cleaver. Eldridge went down there and acted a damn fool when they made him leave, but they did give him the opportunity to be there. And when they embraced Assata Shakur, and there are many other African revolutionaries that they embraced, like Bill Brent and many others of them that they embraced. So this is what principled behavior looks like, you all. And that's what we're trying to convey when we talk about the work of the Cuban Revolution. Now, again, there is this national campaign that is happening that is focused on getting Cuba off of the U.S. terrorist list and also removing Assata from that list and removing the $2 million bounty on Assata Shakur's head. Now, these are things that should happen. But where we stand on this, you all, and again, we praise the organizers who do in this campaign. What they're trying to do is they have signature campaigns, and they want to present that to whoever, the capitalist system, I guess, because they recognize the struggles the label of terrorist poses for Cuba and Assata. And they want to do what they can to lift that. And we have nothing but praise for the work that they're doing. Our problem is that we don't want to negotiate with terrorists. And we know that the number one terrorist on the planet Earth is the United States of America. So our way is not as fast. It's not as quick to a portion of a solution. But we feel like our method is the complete solution. And that is to organize our people to build capacity so that we can eliminate this capitalist system once and for all and build the world around the type of socialist model that socialist Cuba has provided to us. So if you want to get involved with this national campaign, you should do that. We encourage you to do that because you're probably not doing anything right now in regards to this question. So we encourage you to do that. But if you want to see it differently and you say like, well, if we do this, even if we won this, it would just be until the next time. And you would be absolutely right if you said that. The next issue, they'll do the same thing. They'll label a revolutionary country terrorist, and they'll do the same thing. And they'll probably even do it to Cuba again. So if you understand that, then we encourage you to join organizations like the All African People's Revolutionary Party, Black Alliance for Peace, of which the All African People's Revolutionary Party is a part of, a member, participating member. That's what alliance means. Then you should join these organizations because this is the way that we get beyond just making a demand for the capitalist system to do something. We don't make a demand for the capitalist system to do anything. We make them demand for the masses of African people to organize so we can overthrow the capitalist system and bring it to its knees. So everybody's not going to understand that message. We know that some of you love the master on the plantation. We know that. So we're not talking to you, but for those of you who want a little something more, and you're like, we're tired of this same old game, we want to do something different, then that's what you should consider doing, because this is how we can truly put ourselves in a position through revolutionary change to achieve the power. Look at what Cuba has done with their socialist revolution with very limited resources. Imagine what we could do with a united and socialist Africa that has more resources than any other place on the planet Earth. Imagine what we could create and do with all of that, those resources at our disposal. I mean, you have to train yourself to even imagine that, because most of us have such slave mentalities. We see the only thing we're thinking about is how we can get a job from the master. And we're talking about how we can get free and eliminate these problems. And there's always going to be problems because the world is dialectical. But we want to put ourselves in a position where the problems we have are problems that we're in a position to solve. And we have the training, the dedication, and the resources to solve them. And that's what we're talking about. So no, the socialist revolution in Cuba is not a terrorist entity. Absolutely not. Our sister Assata Shakur is not a terrorist. These are revolutionaries, and revolution is a good thing, you all. So this work that we have right now is helping our people understand that revolution is a good thing. Socialist Cuba is a good thing. Assata Shakur is a good thing. One unified socialist Africa is a good thing. Revolution to eliminate capitalism and replace it with socialism the worldwide, leading to world communism, is a thing. This is our work right now. And we know a lot of you can't understand it. But if you had, if you had 20 seconds to define socialism, 20 additional seconds to define revolution, 20 additional seconds to define communism, 20 additional seconds to define Pan-Africanism, and if you could do it in those 120 seconds, you could define all of those concepts, you would win $1 million. 99% of y'all would leave broke. You couldn't define any of it. So we don't care that you don't, you're like, well, what he's saying don't make no sense because you don't know what the hell we're talking about. So your mind isn't even, it's like the old bumper sticker said, if you can't change your mind, how do you know you have one? So we're talking to people who are willing and open to have an open mind, change their mind, and are honest people who recognize, like, I don't know about this stuff and I need to know. So that's who we're talking to. So we hope that this message reaches you, because we should do everything we can to support the socialist Cuban revolution and to support our sister Assata Shakur and all revolutionaries, African revolutionaries and others who are fighting for a better world. So we want to thank you for joining us, and we ask you to join us next week, Sunday, December 17th. I will be en route going home to Africa, but we'll stop long enough to broadcast this program. And next week, we're going to be remembering Anna Mae Aquash, our wonderful activist from the American Indian movement who was murdered through a COINTELPRO scheme from the U.S. government. And we want to talk about her and her contributions. December is the month where she disappeared and we lost her forever in her physical form. So we want to talk about her and lift up the energy and the spirit of the positive example that she gave us. And so we ask you to join us next week. The red QR code at the top, you have all of our AAPRP programs available to you. And then you have the Forward Ever shop where you can buy something. I know you're celebrating Miss Christ. So at least buy your relatives, your loved ones, whoever, some African conscious material like what I have on today, this beautiful hoodie that I wore out of state because I just arrived like an hour or so ago from a 7-hour drive of doing activist work out of state. So I was kept warm by this African hoodie that comes from our Forward Ever shop. So you should buy one for everybody that you're giving these imperialist presents to. And hoodcommunist.org. You should go there, support revolutionary African literature. And a betterworld.me, you can get these and all the other videos there. Join the All African People's Revolutionary Party. Go to www.aprp-intl.org, you all. And again, you can go to the books with the QR code at the bottom. Support the work that our comrades in the AAPP are doing on the ground in Burkina Faso. Become a sponsor for explain there all of the work that they're doing. So do that. And our book, my book, A Guide for Organized Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. I finance the work like what I did this weekend by proceeds I get from the book. So we're organizing around the world against capitalism, against fascism, and whatever proceeds I get from people buying the book, that's what I use them for. So please spread the word there. We are fighting for forward progress, and we are winning. We thank you for joining us today. We hope you are well. We ask you to join us again next week. Go to all of our programs. We hope that you have a wonderful week. Take care of yourself and understand that the best self-care is revolutionary work. Forward ever, backwards never. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday evening.